He is sitting all alone in a jail cell.
He's under something, it's called Close Watch, which is similar to Suicide Watch. It's pretty much the bare essentials.
Because police say he killed his entire family.
He's a murderer. He never once cried.
But he sure does have a lot of requests for the judge in his case.
Confidential jail visits? Who is he talking to? Could one of those visitors be someone that he had an affair with?
Is Chris Watts actually worried about a media frenzy?
You gotta see what you're up against.
Plus, you know the Wattses as a couple.
Everyone who looked at Shanann and Chris, they just immediate thought was love.
People are placed in our life for a reason.
But what was Chris like before Shanann?
He was a good mechanic.
I always wondered why he was so quiet.
Were there foreboding signs of what lay ahead in his future?
That's not the Chris we know.
We talk exclusively with the roommate of the man now accused of murder. Good evening, everyone. I'm Ashley Banfield. This is Crime and Justice. Tonight in Greeley, Colorado, Chris Watts is all alone in a jail cell where he spent all day by himself, probably thinking about his wife, Shanann, his little girls, Bella and Cece, and his unborn baby boy, Nico, who Chris Watts will never see again because police say Chris Watts murdered them all. And if solitary confinement under suicide watch isn't punishment enough, before Chris goes to trial, inmate number 360519 is getting an extra dose of denial from his very own judge. Because Chris has made multiple motions since slipping into that orange jumpsuit, trying to keep certain details from getting out. And he is not exactly getting his way. But Chris isn't the only one filing the motions because, curiously enough, prosecution just filed a motion of their own. And hot off the press, they're asking that the autopsy report that we've all been waiting on stay private all the way up until this case goes to trial. The autopsy report that could hold all of the answers as to how these girls were killed and whether it was Chris Watts who did all the killing. Joining me now, crime journalist Pat Lalamak. Pat, this was a real surprise to see the prosecution looking to make sure the autopsies didn't go public, and not just now, and not just for a few weeks, all the way until trial. Why'd they do this?
Well, my guess is in this case that they feel that the information about the results of those autopsies is so pertinent and critical to getting a conviction in their case. They don't want to take any chances. And, you know, as an observer and as a media person, we'd like to know. As an observer, I can understand why.
But what about the notion of interviewing witnesses? Does it give you an idea that maybe they aren't as far along as we thought they might be?
No, I read it perhaps more the opposite. It said they were afraid that the release of the information could taint witnesses who have not yet been interviewed and, of course, a potential jury pool. Maybe there are people they are setting their sights on, potential witnesses that they haven't spoken to. And I think, in fairness to their investigation, they have every right to cross the T's, dot the I's, and keep it shut at this point.
Jeffrey Gold, you're a defense attorney. Does this sound to you like they are so worried about what the details are in that autopsy that they absolutely can't have people out there that they still have to witness knowing what they know?
Well, I mean, it may be they have to give it to the defense pretty soon, you know.
They haven't yet.
But they need to when they give discovery. So there may be a short window of people that they do need to interview. I think it's more likely than the taint of the jury because they haven't made a motion, you know, as to the defense. Because when the defense gets it, they can do what they want with it unless there is such a motion.
They're absolutely saying in writing that releasing this would, quote, result in tainting witnesses that have not yet been interviewed. Jeffrey, what kind of witnesses would be tainted by how these people died other than Chris himself?
Well, I mean, you know, we don't know. We don't know what's in that autopsy report. If we knew what was in there, we might guess the witnesses. But I do agree with what Pat said. They may not be as far along in this investigation as we thought.
Pat, the other issue, and we just brought this out from one of the motions last week, and that was that the prosecutors wanted cheek swabs, the prosecutors wanted handprints and fingerprints, and the prosecutors wanted photographs of that being done to the hands. I mean, they wanted it so airtight that even the fingerprints and the palm prints had to be photographed while being actually executed. And those photographs, they called them Polaroids, hearkening back to the day where they probably were Polaroids. They wanted them clipped to the file as the file was being completed right there in front, so there'd be no chain of custody issues. How did Chris Watts respond to that?
Well, I happen to have it right here. According to Chris Watts, now I can't wait to hear the attorneys dissect this one. He cites the Fourth Amendment search and seizure, and he says there's no probable cause. There's no reason why he should have to do this. He hasn't seen a page of discovery, and therefore he says he doesn't have to do this.
That's crazy because, as I recall the Fourth Amendment, from the top of my head, it's unreasonable. Search and seizure. And what is unreasonable about a guy who's wanted for trial on 3 different murder charges, 2 murder one case for position of trust, and then a battery of other charges, 9 felony counts against this guy. Jeffrey Gold, jump in here. You're the lawyer. Unreasonable search and seizure, I understand. But how unreasonable is it to ask a guy who's in solitary on murder charges for his palm prints, his fingerprints, and his cheek swab?
These exemplars are all routine. All the swabs are routine. There's no Fifth Amendment right. They really don't need much at all. They have enough to ask for it. So it's going to be...
Well, what is this? Is this a defense attorney trying to make hay and make it difficult and make it expensive for a prosecutor?
Well, I don't know about expensive, just to object. That's all. To object. They're not going to win. They're going to get the swabs. They're going to get any kind of exemplars they want in this situation. It would be different if there was no probable cause for the offense, but obviously there is.
Yeah. Kyle Peltz, you're sitting beside Jeffrey Gold, and Kyle has been working on this case. You're a crime and justice producer, but honestly, you're a document demon. I have not seen somebody comb through the documents like you have in this case. And in fact, you have been instrumental in getting many of them actually posted from the requests and the conversations you've had with the court, which means you've had to read them very fast. And there's been sort of a snowstorm of them lately. Something that you noticed about the media interest in the case. Give me a bit of a feel for what you're seeing in terms of this fight that Chris has been having to shut down leaks.
That's right. We knew Chris wasn't happy about some of the information coming out in the media. He's thinking someone in law enforcement was leaking this information, and he actually asked the judge to order a massive investigation into who was doing this. And today, the court just released a handful more documents where the judge slapped down that request and said, no, we're not launching an investigation.
I think you were either on the set or really close by when we broke the news about his conditions in solitary under suicide watch. He has no reading material in his cell, but he is allowed to look at a communal newspaper or a couple of newspapers out in the hour out room. That's the room where you get to spend your 1 hour out of your 24 out in another room. And on the table, there are some newspapers. So Chris Watts has access to news in that respect. He doesn't have access to television at all. But he seems to know, or at least his attorney seems to know exactly what's been leaked. And he put it down on paper. He actually listed what he's angry with.
He did. You would think that Hour Out room that he has access to maybe subscribes to People Magazine, because People Magazine comes up frequently in his documents. He's not happy with some of the information that they're getting, apparently from law enforcement
He's
sources.
actually quoting them, isn't he?
He quotes quite a few People Magazine issues here.
I remember one of the first things that People Magazine came out with was that he showed no emotion while he was being booked. And he cited that.
He cited that. I think that was one of the first things he cited. There was another People article, and I'm reading here because People's broken a lot of news and Chris Watts isn't happy about it, where a source apparently says there's no evidence Shanann killed the kids. And People Magazine even had some sources saying there's evidence Chris had been thinking about this for some time, down to the evidence found in Chris's truck.
So last week we broke that story. We didn't break the story. We told what had been broken on that story. Again, from People Magazine. They have an impeccable source, it seems, about the evidence from the truck. And he cites the evidence. What did he say exactly?
That article that cites the evidence in the truck, Chris puts that in one of his documents. And he also mentions the evidence found in the bedding, clothes, computers, and phones, the text messages and search histories. Him and his defense team aren't happy with this information getting out there.
They listed it all out in their motions to...
They mentioned that whole document.
And what did the judge ultimately say about this demand from Chris Watts to investigate the entire defense, from every police department that touched the case to the prosecutor's office to the sheriff's department to the jailers, what was the judge's response to Mr. Christopher Watts?
Said it's not happening. That's not what prosecutors do.
To hell with you, is what he said. To hell with you. We're not doing it. We're not doing your massive government investigation that you've asked for. So that's it. That's the end of that.
Well, Chris is fighting back. He's asking the judge now to reconsider that. No word on if the judge has ruled on that yet, though.
Okay, so one of the big questions I would have is that there's been a lot of news, including on this program, broken about his sexual predilections prior to these alleged murders, right? Because what are the things you look for when there's a wife and children murdered and it's out of the blue and it's uncharacteristic? You wonder about the affairs. Well, some of the news broke about the affair at work that was in the affidavit, and then the other affairs that came from this program and from People magazine. Did he complain about those?
No, and that's the one thing that an article does not mention that Chris cites in his court documents. None of these People articles, none of these other local news articles that Chris takes issue with mention anything about extramarital affairs other than the one police say was going on with someone at work.
Yeah, so goes without saying that some of the most lurid parts of the investigation so far have been that there were male and female lovers, and not just one or two, that there were many, but not. And I said you were the document demon because I know you went over every inch of these documents. You went over every inch of the complaints that Chris Watts had to the court about the coverage, about the media coverage, ours included. Not one mention about the men and women he's been seeing.
Pretty much every People article that came out, Chris Watts is then telling the judge, hey, look, another leak, another leak. I mean, almost as he's reading it real time. But in the course of all of these articles coming out, there was an article by People magazine mentioning relationships with both men and women, and Chris Watts does not mention that article at all.
There was a man on this program who alleged to have a 10-month affair with him as well, and he didn't have any complaints about that. Not one mention in all those documents. Has he been given discovery? Because that's a big part of this.
Well, as of 2 weeks ago, his defense team says they haven't seen a single page of discovery.
Wow. Not a single. Jeff, is that weird?
No,
we're a month into this.
No, they have some more time to do that. He's not being
not a single page.
He's not being arraigned yet.
Yeah,
so they have time to do that. I would just want to mention on the reason why it's about the government, the state in this case, is because he may have a motion. Forget about the investigation. He'll never get the investigation, but he can have an motion to dismiss the case if he could prove the state was selectively leaking things to taint the jury. That's where it goes legally. This stuff about the investigation was over the top.
Well, that's listen, everything about this case is over the top. And I think it's because nothing about this case makes sense. You don't typically have an accused family annihilator with a background like Chris Watts, with a wife like Chris Watts, with children like Chris Watts, with Facebook pages like Chris Watts. A guy like this who everybody, I mean, literally everyone whom we've contacted has said this was not the guy. And who do you think might know him best? Who do you think might know the guy before this news broke, other than the dead people? It might be the people who lived with him. It might be his roommate. It might be the man who knew Chris when. And after the break, he's going to speak with us. I want to throw Jeff Gold in here for a second. What probable cause does somebody need to shut down a site like that home when 3 people are missing? Everything is locked up tight from the inside, okay? There's no breach, there's nothing. But 3 people are missing, including 2 children, and bed sheets are all askew, and a guy's on the porch acting weird. What kind of probable cause do you need to say, Mr. Watts, you can't stay here tonight, it's a crime scene?
You know, it probably wasn't at the time because people go missing, women go missing, and they take their kids. They leave. So, you know, you have to have a little bit more, which I think they had by the next day. So I'm not going to fault the police yet for it because that's what happens. People leave.
He told 2 different stories to the officers that arrived. One, he said he got up at 4. The other one, he was up at 5.
I get you, but I don't know that we can fault the police quite yet because people leave.
I don't mean it's a fault. All I say is what probable cause do you need to say, Mr. Watts, we're going to find your family. But in the meantime, any criminal who came in here and stole them, we want to protect the scene.
You need probable cause of crime committed, that somebody was kidnapped or killed or assaulted or something.
Her phone, her keys, her medicine, her car seats, her car, everything is locked up in that house.
Right. I think that first night you have to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Could have been the most critical night for evidence.
You just don't know.
There are so many things that are mystifying about this story, and there are so many missing pieces of this puzzle, and perhaps that is why it is so mystifying, because we're waiting for those pieces to get filled in. But we're starting to make some guesses as to what might be those missing pieces, and the bed sheets are a big part of the story. Jeffrey Gold, I want you to come back into this story along with Art Roderick. When the police showed up on Monday morning, ostensibly there's a missing persons case. They did a check of the house. And actually, Kyle Peltz, I know you've got the documents in front of you. The warrantless affidavit says they found bed sheets clumped up on the bedroom floor that very morning, about noon or a little bit after noon. Bed sheets from the master bed clumped up, correct?
Right.
But they didn't say what sheets.
Right. We know 2 officers arrived that day for the welfare check. When they get there, they find the master bedroom bed stripped of its bedding on the floor.
Right.
Now, they do say they checked that bedding and found no signs of foul play.
But they didn't count the pieces of the bedding, did they?
It's not in the document,
Okay.
no.
So what's interesting is later in the document, Jeffrey, it says they eventually, and they don't say when, but they eventually find 3 pieces of bedding in the kitchen trash, 2 pillowcases and a top sheet. It appears there's no fitted sheet, but we do know that a matching sheet to that set is found out in the oil field. So is it wrong to extrapolate here to say, since they didn't give us this timeline of when those 2 sets of sheets are found, that perhaps if he's guilty, he may have used the fitted sheet from the master bed to wrap one of the bodies, I doubt all 3, for burial, because one body, Shanann's, was found in the shallow grave. And then eventually, once the police left and he was able to stay in that house on Monday night, he realized, damn it, I have an incomplete set of sheets, and I know that the completed set is out on that field. I'm in big trouble if they ever find that sheet out in the field and they find these sheets in my house. I think I'll put them in the kitchen trash and eventually get rid of them.
I mean, that's very logical. And if a prosecutor never knows for sure, it's a great theory for him to tell a jury because it makes sense. What you've decided here makes a lot of sense.